Everyone understood. And in July, remember, we had 60 votes for health care in the Senate, and we had 258 Democrats in the House of Representatives, and we had a Democrat in the White House. So the idea is that health care was on the way, and it was completely off the table after this unfortunate comment at the press conference. But then we had the beer summit, and I hope people not only get the book, but look at the photograph of the beer summit. It looks great, right? You see 2 black guys, 2 white guys, Biden and Obama and Gates and Crowley sitting there having a beer. It looks like a great photograph, right? Look at it very carefully, because the one thing you notice is that Joe Biden's beer mug is full. Why? Joe doesn't drink. He doesn't even drink non-alcoholic beer. So he's having a great time. The president brought him into the discussion for the photo op and then said, Joe, get out of here. Why? Because what might have Joe Biden said when the three are, well, I don't even want to give you some ideas of the next crisis in America if Joe Biden had been free to talk, hey, Crowley, I won't repeat what he might have said. But the president handled that well and took it off of the agenda. And then got back to the business of the stimulus bill, health care, and jobs and other issues for our country, which I think are very important.
Well, I'd like to, pursuing the rest of the expansion of the theme in your book, which obviously President Obama decided not to deal with any further. You talk about this historical issue of driving while black, walking while black in America. You talk about Robert Wilkins and the 20-year battle that he had with the state of Maryland over racial profiling. Could you talk about that?
Sure. That's why this is not just about race, it's also about class. I talk about my colleague, Professor Alan Counter, who was suspected of a robbery in Harvard Yard, and his students had to come out to verify who he was, other than having him suspected as a robber. I talk about Robert Wilkins, who was one of my students in my clinic at Harvard. He worked at the same office I worked at, the D.C. Public Defender Service, coming from his grandfather's funeral in Chicago, stopped on the Maryland highways, and they said, we want to search your car. And Robert, to his credit, said, have you read the latest Supreme Court case? You can't do this without probable cause. They said, we don't need it. If you don't sign the consent form, we'll search. They searched the interior and the entire car. And Robert went to his office and said, this is not right. And he called the ACLU in Maryland and the NAACP, and they filed a lawsuit. It took years, but he won a judgment against them. The lawyers were paid, and Maryland said they would stop their racial profiling. And we thought it was over. And then years later, Robert finds out again that it's happening, and he's filed another claim. The good news is that President Obama has nominated him to the federal court as a federal judge in Washington, D.C., which is a great thing. But the reality is that he started the idea of driving while black, and Johnny Cochran continued it with the 4 men here in New Jersey who were pulled over, and they won a $12 million judgment. And Johnny Cochran even had his own driving while black incident, driving a Rolls Royce in Los Angeles. So it's pretty. And it's not just black; it's black and brown. It's across the board.
But in the Wilkins case, they uncovered that 75% of the police stops on I-95 in Maryland were of African Americans. Right. Well, there are only 17% of the drivers on I-95.
Absolutely, and I put that all here because there is the assumption, if you watch the news every night, you have this sort of built-in sense about all the criminals are black and they're all selling drugs and members of gangs and et cetera, and this dispels that myth that Maryland is one case, but you can look at stops and highways everywhere. And the last chapter in my book is called 100 Ways of Looking at a Black Man, to show that everybody from our Attorney General, Eric Holder, right here in New York at Columbia, driving home to D.C. and driving to a meeting in D.C., stopped because the police said they thought he had weapons. And he said they searched his car, found no weapons. He said it was the most humiliating experience he's had in life. He remembered that. It's happened to Bob Herbert, a reporter for the New York Times, trying to get a cab, and the immigrant cab driver locked her door, wouldn't let him in because who is this black man trying to jump in my cab this weekend? And it goes over and over again. Lou Gossett Jr., right? You're talking about the challenges of he won an Oscar, right? A great friend of mine just wrote his own book, right? An Actor and a Gentleman, a terrific book about his plight of being an Oscar-winning actor, but couldn't get a job unless they caricatured the job in ways that he found demeaning. And he talks about those problems as well.
You also have Thurgood Marshall there listed as well.
Thurgood Marshall and John Hope Franklin. Thurgood Marshall, civil rights lawyer in 1930, going down south, winning cases, but still being profiled as someone who shouldn't be where he was. Derek Bell, my former Harvard professor, he also taught my daughter Rashida at NYU Law School, the challenges he had. The most interesting one is not about police. It's a friend of mine, Prince Chambliss in Tennessee. And I put these in there because it's not just profiling by police, but Prince Chambliss was cutting his grass in Memphis in a very prominent neighborhood. And an elderly white woman drove by, saw him in his khakis and an old sports T-shirt cutting grass. And an elderly white woman said, "Hey, you, how much you charge to cut the grass?" And Prince turned around without missing a beat and said, "I don't charge to cut the grass, but I get to sleep with the lady of the house." That woman hit the gas and pulled off as quick as she could. Now, it's in the book to see if she's learned a lesson, because his point was, as Carl Ronan said before, assumptions are made about people based on race, and this litany of cases is making us all think about what we need to do going forward.
Your comment on today's report that's coming out on the Cambridge Police Department, and 2 weeks ago, the New England Center for Investigative Reporting finding that race wasn't a factor, that the most common factor linking people arrested in Cambridge for disorderly conduct is that they're screaming or cursing at the police.
It's very interesting, and the question was whether or not, here's the clear thing, Professor Gates did not break the law in his house by saying, as he said, "Do you know who I am? Why are you doing this? I want your name and I want your badge. I'm going to file a complaint." He said all the things. What I teach my students to do in 25 years, never, ever, ever, ever tell a police officer, "I'm going to file a complaint. Give me your name and badge number." I say, Amy, I look at their chest, and you'll see their name on one side, you'll see their badge number on the other side. Remember it and file it later. Never do that. Never reach down to pick up something in the car. Put your hands on the steering wheel. But we're lawyers. I said, that's exactly right. You're lawyers, but you're going to be presumed guilty until you do something concrete. And that's why these reports, I think, missed the point, because Gates was not drinking. He was not on drugs. He's 58 years old, 150 pounds. Permanently disabled with his right leg, with hip surgery, and one leg short than the other. And here is with Crowley, you know, "Do you know who I am?" Looking up, and "Do you know who I am?" Right? Little Gates, he's no threat. He's angry because he's been mistreated.
We just have a minute, and I want to go to a wholly different issue,
Sure.
or maybe in some ways related, and that is Robert Byrd will be laying in state, the senator who just died at the age of 92 from West Virginia. And I wanted to ask you about his history and your comments. Yes, he was famous for opposing the war in Iraq, becoming very progressive at the end of his life. But in the 40s, he was a prominent member of the Klan. He rose to the position of exalted cyclops. He opposed desegregation of the military, filibustered the '64 Civil Rights Act. He would later apologize. In 2008, he supported President Obama for president. Your comment?
Well, you know, it's a big loss to lose Robert Byrd and then having lost as well Ted Kennedy. Because it tells us that people change in their lifetimes. Byrd was like Strom Thurmond. Strom Thurmond from South Carolina had a long record. They were like Thurgood Marshall, who grew up in the segregated South, and they expressed what they believed. But you know what? They all were transformed in some way. And Robert Byrd, being as strongly against the war, supporting Obama in West Virginia, Skip Gates' home state, when West Virginia didn't support him, told you he was a man of principle and honor. And my condolences go to him and his family. He is an American hero, just like Justice Black on the Supreme Court, Ku Klux Klan member, but became one of the most distinguished justices. We don't judge people by how they were born, but how they lived that life in the long term. And here is a man in the long term who was a giant and a champion.
Well, we want to thank you very much for being with us. Charles Ogletree, professor of law at Harvard Law School. His latest book is The Presumption of Guilt, The Arrest of Henry Louis Gates, Jr. and Race, Class, and Crime in America. That does it for today's broadcast. Happy birthday to Isis Phillips and Renata Pumaral. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Berkshire, Fabio Cadusa, Armato, Angelique Comet, Steve Martinez, Nicole Salazar, Hani Masood, Robbie Karen, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, our engineer. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks.